Well, g'day there, Sam, and everyone in the York Peninsula, South Australia. It's G.Anderson here from Agriculture Victoria. Just going to give a quick climate update. Now, we do a lot of work with farmers across Southeast Australia, and I know they're all asking for better forecasts. And actually, the good news is forecasts are getting better, bigger computers, lots more data points, and so forecasts are getting better. But one of the key things is also that we understand how and where to read seasonal forecasts, and sometimes you can read too much into them. So that's what we're going to sort of cover in this talk. But also, I guess one of the main things is forecasts can be useful, but really the main thing is focusing on all of the things that you've got control over on farm, and Australian farmers do a brilliant job at managing that. And I guess we're just part of a project at the minute which is teamed up across the country, which is about trying to help better understand and know where to use forecasts. Just looking at rainfall for May, this is you can see here for the last month. So anything over the yellow is 25, and then this is sort of over the 50 to 100 mil. So you can see for your part of the world, all in that sort of 50 to 100 mil mark, which is pretty good. And what I'll just show this next slide is going to be the same of May rainfall, but it's going to compare that in terms of long-term comparisons of deciles. So you can see here that deciles is basically, when you look at the long-term record for May, a decile 10 is where rainfall for May was in the wettest 10% of years, and you can see some of that further north and even some wettest on record. Decile 4 to 7 sort of average, and then decile 1 is where there's within the driest 10% of years. So we saw a bit of that last year. But so anyway, your part of the world's largely travelling all right. And just looking back at the last 3 months, you can sort of see your part of the world's been largely either average or some decile 8, 9 and a little bit of decile 10 in there as well. So largely tracking pretty well. And that's the last 3 months just in the context of the all of Australia. So you can see WA was off to a pretty good wet start, and most of this part of the world's average or a bit wetter. And a few dry areas over here, but I dare say they're getting moisture in this big event that's happening on the weekend. Looking at last year was a bit of a tricky year. There was some moisture around, but we also had the El Nino, and you can sort of see your part of the world into some of the decile 1, 2 and 3. So some of the southern parts of the country missed out last year, and other parts were a bit luckier. And if you look at 2014 and 15, those 2 years compared to the long-term average, you can sort of see a bit of a patch there in Western Victoria and South Australia that was driest on record. Your part of the world, those 2 years have been fairly dry. So, but you don't have to go too far to the north when there's been plenty of moisture around. And speaking of moisture, we don't have to go back too far. 2010 and 11, that 2-year period from the Bureau's point of view was saying our wettest 2-year period in history. So decile 8, 9, your part of the world, but a lot of the country was in decile 10 that year. So we'll talk about where did all of that moisture come from to make it so wet. And I guess a bit more of a broader pattern that since the late 90s, this is just that growing season, April, October rainfall, but we can sort of see compared to the last 100 years, that sort of 18-year period's been a bit drier than at longer term, especially down on some of these southern tips. So we'll talk a little bit about what that might be about as well. Now here's a longer term rainfall record from Maitland, and it goes back to 1879 all the way through to 2015. And basically it's an anomaly graph, so it's just showing the long-term average, which is slap bang on 500 mil right through that long-term average. And you can see some years up to over 800 millimetres rainfall, and some years barely makes it to 300. So a lot of variability in there. And as you can see, average doesn't happen that often, but you can see sort of, those big droughts, which can all remember, and also those sort of runs of years where you get a few crook ones in a row, and I can see a few there. The 80s looked a bit tough, and a few dry years sort of thrown in there, but you also had a few good ones. We'll just look now through the seasons. Here's summer for Maitland, and you can see 60 mils there, that longer term average for summer. Highly variable, a few wet summers thrown in there. That one around World War II looked pretty wet. But a lot of variability in that sort of pattern. I guess your last few summers looks like you've struck a few where you've got a bit of rain. Then autumn, 123 mils long-term average. Plenty of variability there. Interesting to see here. Your last probably 8 autumns have been really good. I don't see many districts that have had such a run of terrific autumns. So well done to you guys. A lot of places we sort of see autumns being a bit poorer, and that's sort of continued in a lot of places in southeastern Australia. But you're defying that trend, so good luck. Winter 196, winter-dominated rainfall. Bit of variability there, and no major trends there. Spring, I guess spring's highly variable. It looks to me, when you look at that longer term record, that you've almost got greater variability there coming on in spring. But also, you've had a couple of pretty crook springs in a row. In fact, those last sort of 5 years, or the last 10 years, you've only had a couple of springs that have been really good. So it's probably the one part of your weather patterns you'd like to improve. Fingers crossed for this year. So here are the big climate drivers that really sit behind our wetter and dry years. You can see those to make rainfall down south here, we need two things. We need a good flow of tropical moisture that comes in and feeds into our weather patterns. And then the weather patterns are really about the number of events that come through in any one year. And you can see the southern annular mode here, really important, all of these rain triggers that head across the south. But we've got the El Nino Southern Oscillation, really important driver here which determines largely how much moisture is heading to our part of the world from one year to the next. And in an El Nino year, there's less moisture coming out of this part of the ocean. And in a La Nina year, when it's wetter, it's sending plenty. Also, the Indian Ocean dipole up here, it can be set up where it can be quite favourable for wetter years down this part of the world, or it can be in an unhelpful mood. So years like 2006, when it was dry, we had an El Nino out here, not much moisture. IOD was also in its dry phase, so really not much moisture to feed into our weather patterns down south. The wet spring of 2010, La Nina out here, plenty of moisture barrelling in, the IOD in its wetter phase, and pretty much feeding into those weather events, and that relates to those sort of wetter years. And here's a sea surface temperature map. It's looking at September 2006 in a dry pattern, and forecasters look at this a bit. And basically along the equator here, those oceans are a lot warmer than down south, but this is an anomaly temperature. So it's showing these areas, these colours are where an area of ocean might be 1 to 2 degrees warmer than its long-term average, and these blue areas are where ocean might be 1 or 2 degrees cooler. So you can see here back in spring 2006, the El Nino out here in the Pacific, warm water, lots of cloud, drags the trade winds backwards. But importantly, if you look at this area in northern Australia, those oceans there are cooler. So basically in those years, there's less cloud, less moisture being derived in that part of the world. And the Indian Ocean's really, that's when it's in its drier phase too. So have a look at this area, and we'll just show you what a wet pattern looks like. We'll go to look at compare it in the spring of 2010. So there you go. Here's October 2010, big La Nina in the Pacific, cooler water, and you can see all the warm water was pushed over here. So the same for the Indian Ocean. So plenty of moisture and cloud feeding into our weather patterns those years. So largely these sea surface temperature maps are one of the tools forecasters use to let us know from one year to the next what sort of mood is the ocean in. Now, just looking at the effect of El Nino, you can see here, this is in previous El Ninos, areas which are drier, decile 2 and 3 sort of years, and it does affect your part of the world. This particular pie chart is just, red is basically decile 1 to 3 years, dry years. Blue is the decile 8 to 10 years, and the yellow is average years. But basically through the long-term record, a third of years in the decile 1 to 3, a third are wet and a third are in between. But if we just look at the 32 El Nino years and we get the rainfall out for them for August to October, that sort of spring rainfall, you can see that at Maitland, 2 out of 3 of those springs were in the decile 1 to 3. So quite a signature on spring rainfall there. But you can see a third of El Ninos were either average or wetter at Maitland. So it doesn't guarantee dry, but it certainly increases the chances of a dry spring. When the La Nina's on and this part of Australia is getting more moisture fed in, you can sort of see that probably 1 in 5 La Ninas were dry, and the rest were average or wetter. Here we got Indian Ocean dipole effect, and basically when there's this Indian Ocean is not set up as well. It's drier in this part of Australia. And when we look at through Maitland's record, in those IOD dry years, half of those were in decile 1 to 3, and the other half were average. So it does change the odds. IOD negative, when it's in its wetter phase, you can see quite a strong signal there, where really only 1 in 10 of those years were dry. The rest were average and wetter. So pretty strong driver, that one, to keep an eye on, especially relevant for this year. Now, I guess one of the things with seasonal forecasts, I think there's some great stuff being done on them. Part of the thing is that really, how far do you trust them? And I think one of the key bits a farmer said, it was just like getting the latest the minutes from the Reserve Bank board meeting. Is there anything sort of special we need to be mindful about the current situation? And largely, good seasonal forecast is really getting yourself a good trusted seasonal forecast, which is giving you some commentary that is relevant for your part of the world. And another key point, I guess, with seasonal forecasts for our part of the world is that as much as we wanted a good clear forecast in autumn, sometimes it doesn't happen, and it's a bit like our footy teams. Everyone's hoping for the best in autumn, but once you get into the season, we got a bit of a better idea of how our footy teams are going to go once you see their form. And it's pretty much similar for those big oceans. Really, in early autumn, they're still setting up, but once we get to about now, they've got a lot more sort of feel for whether they're going to zip into La Nina mode or into a drier or wetter phase. And I guess Dale Gray and we've got the Break newsletter in Victoria, which provides sort of quick updates on just commentary on how things are shaping up from one month to the next. Now, one of the things that are in the Fast Break is a table, and basically Dale does a great job here. Across the top here is a bunch of different global seasonal forecast models, and this is the current one from the end of May. They've done model runs for June, July, August, and basically runs through and just see what are they thinking will happen in the Pacific, what are they thinking will happen with the Indian Ocean, and then what are they thinking from a South Australian point of view about rainfall. Is it going to be average, drier or wetter? And you can see here there's a number of them there that are thinking either average or slightly wetter. So, and that's largely because I guess that IOD is looking to be in that warmer water or slightly wetter phase. If we're looking at this last spring, we'd have seen a number of these having probably half of them had a bit of a drier signal there from the El Nino. And this is just looking at those same seasonal forecast models, but looking at for September, October, November. And again, quite a few of those models are thinking that the La Nina sort of pattern and IOD negative, and a few of them are there thinking plenty of moisture around later in the year. So fingers crossed that's actually comes to bear. One thing people often ask, we had the big El Nino last year, what actually typically happened in our district the year following an El Nino? So we've got that, Dale's printed that off here for Maitland. So these particular years here are the El Nino years, and that was the April-October rainfall in those years. And the colours just show, red were decile 1 to 3 years and blue were the wet years. So more red than anything else. But this is the year after that. So if that was 88, here's 89. And this was the actual monthly rainfall for those years. And what you can see in terms of April-October rainfall, there were a few dry ones, but certainly a much greater chance of the average or wetter following those previous El Ninos. So they don't tend to follow up a lot. But I guess that's one good thing. And notice that some of these wetter years are the years where there happen to be an IOD negative year or wetter phase. So again, a strong driver for wetter years in your part of the world. So that's good old-fashioned variability. So is there anything different going on other than just good old-fashioned variability? And I guess the one thing the meteorologists point to is long-term temperatures for the last 100 years across Australia. Goes up and down, but largely since the 60s, they're saying that each decade's been a bit warmer than the previous one. And I guess when it comes to South Australia, and we've got the same thing in Victoria, spring's probably one season which the last 10 years we've had a number of springs which have been between 1 and 3 degrees warmer. And so while we might have good old-fashioned variability happening with rainfall, it's actually this temperature does tend to bring in the spring a bit quicker because summer's turning up a little bit earlier. And as well as that, with warmer spring daytimes, where actually the incidence of frost in some of these blue areas are where we're still getting plenty of late frosts, which can be a bit challenging. And the culprit, largely the meteorologists saying, well, there's just a bit of a pattern here since the 1950s. There's a bit of a trend here over parts of southern Australia where the pressure pattern, so this is the trend in anticyclone density, so this is sort of high pressures, just a little bit stronger than they used to be, which sort of sets up those conditions for warmer days and a bit higher risk of frost. And looking at this, since 1950, this is pressure pattern across this zone in southern Australia, and it goes up and down, and usually these peaks are years of when there's El Ninos, because there's a higher pressure over Australia, and then these lower years are when there's sort of La Ninas. But you can see a lot of variability there, but there's a bit of a background trend. You can see that El Nino last year just sort of nudged us into stronger pressure territory. So that's sort of, it's variability, but you can just see that largely over time there's just a little bit stronger pressure pattern creeping into our system. And also just some recent work done by David Stevens in WA from AGIC, some good work. And it was just looking at the traditional rainfall seasons of what was summer dominant or winter dominant for the last 100 years, and then looked at how did that compare for the last 15 years, and basically just showed that basically a few of these that rainfall seasons have shifted south a bit. So you guys are still in a winter dominant system, but those zones have sort of shifted south a bit. Now, I guess it's always a real challenge what the weather's going to throw at us next. But one thing farmers and agriculture have done a brilliant job at is really how we're set up to manage this variability and whatever gets thrown at us in the next decade or two. And really, when we look at some of the challenges of the last decade or so, we've still been growing our agricultural output and value. So it's a credit to the great work you guys have done. And it's really, these are all good things. We've got, new modern technologies and equipment, better genetics and systems, improved farm, regional infrastructure, storage, water, fodder, communications, all those things are helping us. We've got growth in local and export markets and value adding, and I guess this one's been a key one, business management for variable years in income. That's been a really key thing to dealing with how we go with making the most of those good years when it's not just volatile climates but also markets, how we make the most of the good years and sow the seeds there for how we ride out some of the crook years. And I guess this has come a long way, farm planning, conservation tillage, just how well you guys look after your soils, and that's been just tremendous. And I guess all these new techniques, just better ways of conserving soil moisture, your weed control, capturing summer moisture so that's available during the year. That's been a real credit to everyone. So while climate's probably going to keep throwing us a few more curveballs in future, just remember there's plenty of stuff there that we've got some control over to manage how we ride out those bumps. So I hope that was pretty useful. If you want to get any more information, that monthly commentary, we do it for Victoria, but most of it's around the large-scale climate drivers, which are also relevant to your part of the world. Just drop an email to The Break, and that's a free email, and we'll send you out that every month. I hope that's of use. Any queries, you can see my contact details there. Anyway, have a good day.